Record. Welcome to the Talking to Kids About Sex interview series. I'm your host, Anya Maness, an educator and a parent coach, helping families talk about sex with their kids so that they can ensure their kids have the knowledge and skills they need to have safe and healthy sexual relationships from the start. Today, I have with us Katie Thune. Katie is an educator licensed to teach health education and special education K through 12. She's certified to teach kids on the autism spectrum, and her master's work focused on developmental disabilities. Katie has developed curricula and courses on the topics of healthy relationships and sexuality education, and she founded Mad Hatter Wellness to support social, emotional, and physical awareness of all. Katie is here to be our expert on teaching sex ed to kids with disabilities and other special needs. And I'm so grateful that you're joining us again this year, Katie.
Yes, thank you.
It was fantastic to have you on last year, and so this is great. So glad to have you again.
Yeah, really happy to be here. Thanks.
So I'm starting everyone out by asking for a story. And I'm sure that with your background and your expertise, you have a story for us, maybe even including a child with special needs, about parenting that child's sexuality. Do you have anything to share with us?
Yeah, I do. So because my work is primarily with people with disabilities, I have found that most of the stories are with older children or teenagers or even adults. And one of my favorite stories just happened recently in a class of teenage boys with autism. You can only imagine, such a fun class. Our class was focused around risks associated with sexual activity. And our final reflection question was, what is something you should do before having sex with a romantic partner? And so we went around the room and heard all kinds of answers, most of them being things that we talked about in class, such as get a condom, ask the person if they have been tested, get tested yourself, things like that. And then we heard go to a rock concert. And what this student meant was go on a date. How great is that? I mean, that's totally what you should do before having sex with a romantic partner. And then the next person says, talk about love. Yes, have a conversation, right? I mean, that's what we want. So that was not exactly where we were thinking the reflection question would take us, but it was exactly where it was supposed to go.
Oh, I love that, because that's really getting at the positives,
Yeah.
And not so much the fear-based piece around sexuality of what do you need to do to protect yourself.
Yeah.
This is like how to make the experience great.
Yeah.
Talk about love, go on dates. This is how you make sex great.
Totally. It was fun. Yeah, it was really cool.
You're a fantastic teacher. Yay! That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I feel like some people in our audience may be curious to know how sex ed for people with special needs would be a little different from just your regular old sex ed, because there's so many ways that kids with special needs are similar, but then of course they have their special needs. So what is different? Like, what would you highlight as the thing that you're doing different from other sex ed teachers?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I feel that sex ed oftentimes is skipped over for students with disabilities. Maybe they're pulled out of the health class, their mainstream health class, or if they were in the mainstream health class, maybe the information is just going right over their head because it's not taught at their level, and so much of that information is missed.
Yeah.
Or sometimes, like, the information might be dissected to deliver what the teacher thinks is most important for that student. So they get kind of a censored version. So it's really important that parents also cover these main points to ensure that they have this solid foundation for safe and healthy relationships, and to repeat these main points over and over, just to make sure that things are understood. So one thing that I think is really, really important for students with disabilities is that we teach the accurate terms for private body parts. So important whether you're going to have a romantic relationship at some point, so you can use the right words when you're in this romantic relationship, or if someone were to have touched that person in a way that they didn't like, they can describe that to the parent or a doctor or caregiver, and that's really helpful. I also teach about body rights. This is so important. My body belongs to me. That's what we teach. and teaching them that no one has the right to touch you unless you say it's okay. You know, a lot of children have many caregivers throughout the day, and they need help with self-care or daily living skills. And so teaching them that a parent, a teacher, a doctor, no one gets to touch you unless you say it's okay. But then we teach the other side of that, in that you don't get to touch another person unless they say it's okay. And that they have the right, that person has the right to say no, just like you have the right to say no. And I mean, sometimes I teach, you know, with doctors, they may have to touch you if they're going to see if you're sick or hurt or whatever. But if something doesn't feel right, so we teach those feelings inside, then you can ask for someone to be in the room with you, or you can, if it really doesn't feel right, someone else could come in instead of that person. But overall, I would say all topics around sexuality are so important for children with disabilities. But as a parent, you know your child the best. You know what they can handle. You know when it's too much. So, but I like to think that any topic you would have with a child without a disability, you would have that same conversation with a child with a disability, but just at their level. So,
yeah. But I think there are a couple differences, and I remember from our conversation last year on this interview series, you pointed out that a kid who gets to say their body boundaries, that's a little different for a kid in a wheelchair. I mean, that even extends to, you don't get to push me someplace, even if you're going to help me, you need to ask my consent. And that was a total light bulb for me, because I don't have any family members in wheelchairs or anything.
Right.
And I was like, oh yeah, that's totally a body boundary, but I didn't even think of it. You know, someone could think they were being so helpful and just do for this person with a disability, but actually that could feel kind of violating.
I mean, just imagine you're sitting in this chair right now, and if someone were to come behind you and just whisk you away without saying anything, I mean, that can be so alarming, and not knowing where you're going. And so even just, you know, I do think a lot of the sex ed for people with disabilities is really teaching and educating the people that work with them.
Yeah.
That is, I think, just as important as teaching the children. Yeah.
Right. And so I can see how, you know, really being clear about that with the other kids.
Yeah.
That might be in that child's class, because sometimes we have these classrooms where everybody is together, you know, special needs and non-special needs. I don't know what you call that, but you know, everybody is mixed in together, because maybe this person is in a wheelchair but doesn't have a different cognitive level. And so then letting the kids know what's the right thing there, you know, what is that child's body boundaries, and helping that child not be apathetic about it, because they do receive so much extra help.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so fantastic.
Yeah.
And what concepts, you know, now that we've covered sort of the physical piece, but what concepts do you think some kids with special needs may have trouble understanding? And I guess I'm curious whether, you know, I know you work with the kids with the autism spectrum, but do you have a perspective on even like ADD or ADHD, right? Something where maybe just their attention isn't where a quote normal kids would be.
Well, I think a couple things, I think, is one that is huge is private versus public. Really hard for many people with disabilities to understand, whether they're children or adults, that private versus public. So we can talk about that. And then the other one is the piece of consent. So, you know, I mean, when you talk about ADHD, many kids and adults with ADHD are super impulsive. So not really understanding to wait for the consent. But I want to first talk about the private and public, because I think that covers everyone. Well, I think people without disabilities have a hard time understanding the difference between private and public.
Especially online. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So what I like to teach is that a private place is a place that belongs to you, okay, when you are alone and when others cannot see you. So like right now, I'm in my home. It belongs to me, right? And I'm all by myself. But other people can see me because you're looking at me right now. So this right here is not a private place. So most of the time we say your bedroom or bathroom at home, but if the bedroom is shared, it's not a private place unless you're alone in that bedroom and maybe the curtains are closed. So that, and you're not on the internet, that would be a private place. And it can be so confusing with the internet, as you mentioned, that can be super confusing. But let's say the bathroom at school, there could be a one-room bathroom. Well, that seems super private. So that's why I like adding the piece in, it belongs to you. Because you could be alone in the bathroom at school and no one can see you if it's a room all by itself, one stall, but it doesn't belong to you. So that's something I really like to talk about. And then also the difference between private and public behaviors are really important. And talking about a private behavior happens in a private place. And so, but then we have things like, well, brushing your teeth, that's pretty private, but it's not something that, it could be a public thing. I mean, you're not taking your clothes off. You're not things like, so some of those things can be kind of this gray area. And that's why we have to just have this conversation and practice it over and over. I mean, the biggest piece, of course, is masturbation is very, very complicated. If you're private, if it feels good to touch your private body parts, it doesn't really matter where you are, you're going to want to do that. And a lot of us know, okay, that's for a private place. But it's complicated in this brain to say, well, it feels good. Why can't I touch it? Why do I have to be in a private place? So I think that's a really important thing to teach when they're young, all the way. I mean, I've come across several incidents with college age students who were masturbating in public, and that can be that it's complicated and could get arrested. I mean, if you're masturbating on the city bus, you're going to get in trouble. It's illegal to do that. So we need to start that when they're really, really young. And then the other piece is consent. It's so many people with disabilities, because they have all of these different caregivers throughout the day or support staff, they've developed this learned compliance, I call it. So, and also thinking that once permission is given if permission is given once, then it's always okay for that person to touch them. And
yeah,
so,
we have that problem with, quote, normal people, right?
Oh my gosh, right?
Like,
everyone.
If I had sex with you once, I guess if
Yep.
you want to, I need to have, like, I keep needing to have sex with you.
Exactly.
So that idea that you can say no the next time.
Mm-hmm.
You can say no the next minute. All that matters is the present moment. I think that needs to be repeated so many times for people.
Mm-hmm. And we talk a lot about it with sex, but we also, just yesterday in a class, we were practicing with adults with disabilities with hugs. You giving consent to just a hug. I mean, that's just as important. And just because I let this person give me a hug doesn't mean it's okay for them to give me a hug every single time they see me. I may not feel like a hug tomorrow, or they might not. So I think it's an easy way for us to actually practice it when we to practice consent with sex, to talk about the hugs or any simple kind of touch, because then you can actually role play it and then have the conversation. Now, if this were to happen with a romantic partner in sex, the same thing is true.
I love that, because you're really skill building there.
Yeah.
Because you're having the conversation and then you're role playing and then you're saying, hey, if we took it up a notch and we were talking about sexual relations, this would still apply.
Yeah.
So would you mind sharing with us how you role play this? Like, I'm especially interested in how you teach them to say no.
Yeah. So, well, and that's hard. So we're teaching appropriate non-compliance. And if this child or this adult has learned to always say yes, it's so hard. So just yesterday in class, we're practicing, and someone will come up, can I give you a hug? And they're like, yeah. And we're like, wait, no, let's practice the no. And so then we start over, can I give you a hug? Yeah. So it's just, and then eventually we'll say, okay, so I really want you to say no to this hug. you're not feeling it today. You really don't want it. Hey, can I give you a hug? No, thanks, not today. Or sometimes I like to teach if you can see when someone's coming up to give you a hug, right? So you just stick your hand out for a handshake or a high five when they're coming at you. So
I like that.
And we teach, it's not always that you have to yell at someone or punch them. If someone wants to touch you and you don't want them to touch you, you can stop it before it gets too far. Which, a lot of the time when we're saying, no, I don't want you to, then they'll practice it as like, no, get away. And it's like, oh, okay, it doesn't always have to do that. Sometimes, yes.
This is the nuance, right?
Right.
They're either all on yes or all on no. And so we need to practice the in-betweens, which is, how about a handshake? How about a fist bump? How about something a little different? I'm just not feeling the hug today. So I like how you gave the words and the gesture that they could use.
And then ideally, if there were to be a consent with sex later, with a romantic partner someday, that if they're not feeling it, they can say, you know what, I'm not feeling it today.
Yeah.
And then I'm okay with kissing or whatever that is. So, yeah.
I like not today because that's real gentle. It doesn't shut the door like, no, never. Yeah. But it also isn't, flimsy.
Yeah. And there's, of course, a place for that, too. No, never. Not happening. Right. But if it's someone that you care about, you might just not be feeling it today. So.
Yeah, and do you ever end up having these conversations about the online stuff?
We do, and it's complicated. A lot of the time we talk about, having someone help you with that kind of piece. But I mean, so many times I've come across with people sending naked pictures to that person, or all of a sudden just seeing it. So again, we go back to the private and public, right? And any type of photo that's public, and whether it's just to your cell phone, it's public, and you're not alone when it comes to anything technology related. So,
okay. So, well, that's helpful to hear how you talk about that. Yeah. So you go back to that foundational private public piece.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
So, what are some strategies that you use? You mentioned the role playing, but do you have any other strategies or tips that you can share with parents for really making this stuff clear? Because, some of us can learn really well from a discussion.
Yeah.
And of course, most of us will learn really well from a role play. But is there anything else that you do with your classes?
I like to use, so role playing and actually acting it out isn't going to work, or just you need an alternative. I like to use these red-green cards. So I don't know if you can see it, but it's like green on one side, red on the other. And talking about, green is a healthy behavior. Because when we come to a green light, we go, right? It's a go behavior, healthy, okay behavior or touch. And then red would be not okay, unhealthy. We come to a stop sign, it's a stop, right? So with stop behavior or a not okay touch. And so then we can brainstorm different behaviors. That would be green, go, or red, stop. Healthy and unhealthy. So for example, my teacher calls me cute names in public. Okay, well, that's red. Okay. Even my teacher calls me cute names in private. Really, really red, right? So we can practice that. A friend high-fives me in the hallway at school. Totally green. A stranger touches my arm on the bus. Okay, pretty red. So practicing that over and over and over can be really, really helpful. Having the child come up with their own scenarios and testing the parent could be a fun thing to do. So I like doing this like super low tech thing. Because I'm sure there's things online that you could find that, videos of things and whatever, but this is just, I love this, that it's so simple. It's just a little piece of paper. So that can be really helpful. And a great way to teach healthy and unhealthy behaviors.
Yeah. I read about this somewhere, and so I don't know if this is going to be familiar to you or not, but I've heard of like a 1 to 5 scale where you talk about, 5 being like the big behavior and 1 being the small behavior. And you can then say, I need you to modulate your behavior. Like right now it needs to be a 2, or right now it needs to be a 4, right? We're outside so you can scream. So in terms of voice level, that would be a 5. Do you ever do this 1 to 5 scale with your kids?
I haven't, but it's something you totally could do. I do the this or this, and someone just this week asked me about that and said, well, what about like a yellow? Because, what if there's something? And so what I do is like, okay, well, my teacher calls me cute names in public. Okay, well, that maybe could be a yellow, right? Because, teachers say, hey, sweetie, come on over, or whatever. Teachers say that in the classroom. And so that, or let's say your teacher is your aunt or uncle or something like that. That could be a little bit different, right? So there are times, so then I say, well, most of the time that would be red, but then we would have a conversation about, okay, but sometimes that happens. And, in classes that I've been in, it happens in that class while we're talking about things like that. Someone will like call someone a cute, hey, love, come here. And I'm like, oh, wait, we were just talking. So it happens, right? And it doesn't always mean that it's red. And so, I haven't done that because in my head, I'm like, okay, it's either red or green. And if it's on the fence, let's just say it's red. But then we can have a talk about it. And maybe it's not like an illegal behavior, but something that we can maybe work through or talk through or something like that.
That's helpful. Thanks for saying all of that. And the 1 to 5 scale I had heard about was about helping the child change their behavior. Yeah. So if you had like 1 to 5 public private, like 1 was public and 5 was private, then I could say, the behavior you're showing right now is a 4, and actually we need a 2.
Yep.
Right, so it's a way of communicating with the child to change their own behavior rather than what you're saying, sort of flipping through, is it appropriate or not appropriate?
Yeah, and a lot of children use those scales, and there's so many different ones. There's different colored ones, there's the numbers, and if that's something that works for your child, that would be a great thing to figure out, hey, let's use it with this.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So I think the hardest part about this is that sometimes there's a disconnect between a child's physical body development and their mental age. And so when that happens, I think sometimes parents and caregivers and teachers kind of freak out, because they don't know how to explain puberty to somebody who's mentally 5, or how to talk about sex, right? Or masturbation, as you brought up before, with somebody who's mentally much younger. And so when there's that disconnect, right? Like if a child is physically going through puberty, but cognitively they are lower functioning, what can or what should parents and educators do?
Well, so first of all, I'm going to say this, and this is something, that it might be a shock to some. People with disabilities are sexual beings, right? And I think
we all are.
We all are, right? We all are sexual beings. And when a child goes through puberty, those hormones, disability or not, are going to start racing all over their body, and regardless of ability. And so it's, unfortunately, in the world we live in, many people view people with disabilities as asexual. And sometimes it's parents, and it's not done out of like hate or anger or whatever. It's like they're trying to keep this person safe. And it's difficult to believe that your child, your sweet, sweet child, is going to have feelings like that someday, or doesn't. And I've run into it with 40-year-old adults and with disabilities who are very sexual beings, and their parents, oh, my daughter does not have feelings like that. And so I think we just, in this world, we're slowly starting to see that people with disabilities are also sexual beings. We all experience feelings of wants and needs, and it's just something that, we need to think about and work through. So when working through all of this with your child with special needs, I think it's just important to have those same conversations. that you would have with any other child, but just do it over and over, repetition, right? And then ideally someday the information will stick. One of the classes we're teaching right now, we've always done it as a 12-week series. And just this year we changed it to 18 weeks. And so right now we're in week 14 and the information stuck. Like I saw it. It was so awesome. And people were saying things like, my body belongs to me, my boundaries, it's my right. And these were adults with disabilities, but we've never seen that before in the 12-week course because we finally, week 12, got them. And then the class ended. And so it's just this repetition is so important. And then eventually it will ideally stick. Yeah.
So we just need to be having those puberty conversations at a 5-year-old level.
Yeah.
That's the answer, right? We just need to do it.
Yeah, doing it at there, because you know your child, you know what words they can use. And using the accurate terms, though, for, I think, what are the accurate terms for private body parts? What is sexual exploitation? They need to know what is okay and what's not okay. I think that's important no matter their age, so that if they come across that and they know it's really not okay for that person to have touched me there, even though it's a person I look up to, that's not okay. And so the conversations are definitely going to look different. They're going to take more time and more care, but just as important, probably more important in a way. Well, not just as important, we'll say. It's all important.
I understand why you're going with almost more important, because I've heard that the rate of sexual abuse for people with special needs is higher than the general public. Is that right?
Right. So a person with a disability, and I hate saying this to parents because it's terrifying, but the rate of sexual assault is 40% higher for someone with a disability than someone without. And so, yeah, maybe it is more important that we teach some of this stuff, because if you're 40% more likely to be assaulted, well, there you go. We need to teach that. So that's why I do teach and want parents to actually define sexual exploitation for the child. They really need to understand what is okay touch, what's not okay touch. They have so many different people in their lives. We all do. We all have so many different people in our lives, and we use different types of touch with all of those different people. Not all family is going to have the same type of touch. Not all friends are going to have the same type of touch. We will also use different types of touch on different days with people, right? So like, let's say this one uncle I see him at a funeral and we give each other a hug, okay? But if I see him just randomly, we might not. It's different all the time. And same with friends. Sometimes it's a high five day and sometimes it's a fist bump day, or some days I really just need a hug. And so I think that's a really important thing to talk about, to protect our kids with special needs. I think it's really important that we teach. And we've touched a little bit on this, but really teaching how to say no. And it's going to look different for every child with a disability, right? If they're nonverbal, they can't say verbally, they cannot say the word no. And so we need to figure out a way for them to stand up for themselves and to practice how they are going to say no in their way. And whether it's signing it or crossing the arms or turning away, or if they're in a wheelchair, rolling that chair away. But that might even be difficult for some of these students. So that's something that needs to be worked through with the parent and the kid, figuring that out. Sometimes bringing in the team, bringing in a teacher or a therapist to help figure that out for that kid. So many students have if they're nonverbal, they might have talking devices. And maybe there's a quick button on there, no, and that's the one, and it's easy access to that no, or something like that. The other thing that I think it is kind of complicated is the word stranger. We always talk about, stranger danger. It's great. Super, super good thing to teach everyone, right? But that word is really difficult for people with disabilities. It's abstract. It's ambiguous. It's many of the people that are in that person's life were strangers at one point.
Yeah.
And they might even be, I mean, let's say, they get a caregiver to come in that they've never met before. That's a stranger. But if they're going to have to help them take a bath or get dressed, well, that's really difficult. And unfortunately, most of the time when a person with a disability is sexually assaulted, it's by someone that they know. So a caregiver or a PCA or a bus aide or their whatever. And it breaks my heart. And of course, the stranger stuff happens as well. It does. But most of the time with people with disabilities, it's someone that they know. And so I think a piece of that is to come up with a list that parents and the kid come up with together of safe people to talk to if someone touched them and they didn't like it. And that it can be hard because if it is someone that they know, a lot of the times, why would you want to believe that your son or your brother or stepson or PCA touched your child in a way that was really uncomfortable? It's a hard thing to believe, but something that we need to know is happening in this world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I guess I tell parents when I'm doing presentations on how to prevent sexual abuse that it's important to tell your child up front that you'll believe them, because a lot of kids assume that if they've been put in this person's care, then you like them and you trust them and you don't want to believe bad things about them. And so if they come and tell you something, that you may just not believe them. And so being really clear up front and saying, I will believe you, both reminds us that people we trust could actually make a misstep or, have bad intentions, and also tells your child that even though they might have picked up this idea that this person is approved, right, that doesn't mean that they can do no wrong and that you don't want to do about it.
And what I teach parents or support staff, I say, if someone approaches you, your child or someone you work with approaches you and tells you something, it's not your job to be detective at that moment. Whether or not you believe them or not, it does not matter in that moment. You say, wow, I believe you. I'm really glad you told me. And then later, it's most of the time, it is true. It's really uncommon that someone with or without a disability would report sexual assault. It's not an easy thing to do. Most of the time it's not reported. And so, but it may not be true, but it's not our job when someone is telling us to say, oh, I don't believe you. And so,
or go into investigator mode.
Exactly. That can come later. That initial response is going to be how it's going to be a determining factor in how this person recovers from with the trauma. And if that initial response is investigator mode, really, we stop, take a breath. I believe you. I'm really glad you told me. And to just turn your voice down and be calm. And that it's hard because it's not something you want to hear, especially from a child. But it's the way we need to think about this.
Yeah, no, that's so helpful because it's how to really be in service for that child rather than being in your own head.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, well, boy, I feel like we could talk about this forever.
I know.
It's so relevant for everybody, right? And then, of course, getting into the nuances is really explaining how to do it for somebody who has a lower cognitive level or who gets mixed up. So, but I guess we do have to call it at some point. So maybe this is a good stopping point. And I think that you had a free gift you wanted to offer parents.
Yeah. So please consider signing up for my email list. So when you do sign up, you'll receive a welcome letter. And in that letter, there will be a PDF of an activity for you to work through with your child on talking about the people in your lives and the different types of touch that you use with those different people. And there will also be a link to our new website, Sexuality for All Abilities. And this site is a much needed educational resource for people with disabilities and their advocates to learn about sexual health. And so this will be a place for resources, webinars, books, exercises, online trainings. It's in its infancy right now. We're working on it, but it will be updated regularly, and ideally hundreds and hundreds of videos and helpful tips and stuff eventually. So the best way is just to sign up for the mailing list so you can get those consistent reminders that videos have been added and more resources.
Yeah, so that you learn what's now available. That's so exciting.
Yeah, it's great.
All right, I know I need to sign up for that, because I know that these things that we've talked about, these nuances, maybe a normal functioning person gets 95% of the stuff, but there's still a 5% gap that they have. And so the videos and resources you're putting together are going to be addressing all those gray areas and nuances. And so I know that I need this resource.
Yeah.
So I don't specifically work with kids of special needs or parents with special needs. So definitely.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Anya.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Katie. And thank you to all the parents who tuned in for this. You're really doing amazing work, because the nightmare is that some kid is on that bus masturbating, because nobody has talked to them about this, because everybody's been intimidated by their cognitive age level. And then that kid may be the one who's touching another kid inappropriately. And oh my God, right? If we'd only had these conversations, we could prevent that whole thing.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you tuning into this interview, and we'll have more for you tomorrow. So thanks, everyone.